In the 12th century, Jerusalem was a bloodbath. The Crusaders had seized control of the city and slaughtered thousands of Muslims, Jews and other Christians who didn't belong to their sect, and everyone around was getting rich off the bloodshed. But far away in the Iraqi city of Tikrit, a baby boy was born who would change all of that. His name was Salahuddin. He was born into a military family and spent his early life traveling between Damascus and Baghdad. There he learned about Islam, justice, faith, and leadership from his father, who was a commander in the army of the Abbasid Caliphate. As a young man, he distinguished himself as a soldier, and by his early 30s had risen to become the leader of a vast Muslim army. But his dream was much bigger than just military conquest. He wanted to unite the Muslim world under one banner and drive out the invaders who had seized Jerusalem, the city that Muslims, Christians, and Jews all considered holy. His first step was to conquer Egypt and establish control of the trade routes there. This made him very rich, and he used his fortune to raise an army and forge alliances with other Muslim princes. Finally, in 1183, he set out to conquer Jerusalem. 3 years later, in 1187, the two armies met at the legendary Battle of Hattin. What happened next would shock the world. Saladin's elite force of 30,000 cavalrymen and 40,000 infantrymen utterly defeated the Crusader army. They captured their leaders, including King Guy of Lusignan, and took over all of Jerusalem. As well as the important cities of Jaffa and Acre, everyone expected the Muslim leader to enter Jerusalem and slaughter his enemies, like the Crusaders had done to Muslims just a few decades before. But what happened next was completely unexpected. When Salahuddin entered Jerusalem on October 2nd, 1187, he did so peacefully. His troops were exhausted and hungry after a long campaign, and he wanted them to rest before entering the city. That gave the inhabitants time to prepare for his arrival. He ordered that churches and other holy places be respected, and that civilians could leave the city unharmed. He even offered Christians and Jews the chance to buy their freedom if they were willing to pay. In all, some 2,000 captives were freed this way. This was not because he was weak or merciful. In fact, he showed no mercy to those who fought against him. Many of his enemies who chose to stay in the city and fight were killed in the battle. And when he took over the city, he showed no mercy to those who resisted his rule. But his overall goal was to take back Jerusalem, not to destroy it. He didn't want to repeat the mistakes of the Crusaders. As Guy of Lusignan rode through the streets of Jerusalem on his way to meet Salahuddin, he saw bodies strewn everywhere, corpses left from the battle still lying in the streets, unburied. It was a grim sight, but it was nothing compared to what the Crusaders had done just a few years before. In 1099, when the Crusaders seized Jerusalem, they went on a rampage, killing hundreds of Muslims, Jews, and other Christians who didn't belong to their sect. They burned down entire neighborhoods, desecrated holy sites, and left the city in ruins. Even sacks of gold found in the streets were melted down and used to make a giant replica of the true cross. But while the Crusaders had been motivated by religious zeal, Salahuddin had a different motivation. He was driven by a desire for justice and a sense of duty to his people. He wanted to take Jerusalem back, not to punish the Crusaders, but to restore order and security to the region. He hoped that by showing mercy to the people of Jerusalem, he would win their respect and loyalty, and he did. Though some members of his army wanted to plunder the city, Saladin refused, ordering them to behave with honor and to treat the inhabitants of Jerusalem well. He followed this advice himself, living in a small tent near the city walls, instead of taking over the Crusader palace. News of his magnanimity spread throughout the Middle East and Europe, where his enemies couldn't believe that he wasn't using his victory to pillage and plunder. One of them, King Richard, the Lionheart of England, was so impressed by his actions that he wrote, "There never was a more noble or a more virtuous enemy." When the two finally met in battle, they fought bravely against each other, but always with respect. Richard would go on to write of his admiration for Saladin, describing him as a great prince and noble enemy. After retaking Jerusalem, Saladin continued to expand his empire, conquering Syria and Egypt and fighting the Crusaders in northern Africa. He was successful in battle, but he also made time to pursue his other interests. He loved poetry and was a patron of the arts. He built schools and hospitals and was generous to the poor. He died in 1193, not in a palace, but nearly penniless. He had given away all his wealth to charity. Today, he remains one of the most respected leaders in both East and West. Not for how much he conquered, but for how he treated others.